The year is 1348 and you are Sir Reginald, a low-ranking knight employed by the French crown. You've just returned from fighting the 100 Years' War against the English, where your unit was nearly wiped out due to poor planning by your superiors. And now you have to get back to France before your king finds out you were absent without leave. But you're not looking forward to going home. You've been hearing rumors that something terrible has happened there. Rumors of horrible sores, black pustules, and people dying left and right. What could it be? Little do you know, you're about to become part of the largest human disaster in European history. Welcome to my channel. It's time to learn some history so you can sleep to the sweet sounds of my voice. Tonight's episode, the dark reality of life in the Middle Ages. Now let's learn some history. The Black Death is one of the most well-known disasters in human history. It resulted in an estimated 25 million deaths in Europe alone, making it the deadliest pandemic in macro history and responsible for killing roughly 30 to 50% of the population. So how did this happen? Well, we can thank our buddy climate change for this one. The Northern Hemisphere had just emerged from a period of relative warmth known as the medieval climate optimum. But around 1300 CE, the temperature began to drop steadily and dramatically. By 1315, the growing cold snap produced the worst harvest failure in European history. Crop failures continued into the following years, and food became scarce. This led to widespread famine which lasted until 1318. Now, if you're a fan of Game of Thrones, you may remember the horrible winter that never seemed to end. Well, this is essentially what the people of medieval Europe experienced. After 3 years of bad harvests, starvation became commonplace. The price of grain quadrupled, sometimes even quintupling. Meat prices fell drastically as livestock perished. People living in towns and cities suffered the worst, especially since they depended on purchasing their food instead of growing or raising it themselves. Many died, including Queen Isabella of France. To make matters worse, this famine coincided with a series of overlapping conflicts, including the aforementioned 100 Years' War between England and France, the struggle between the kings of Bohemia and Hungary over the Holy Roman Empire, and the war between Castile and Granada over control of Iberia. This led to the breakdown of trade networks and supply lines, which meant that food shortages became even worse. By the time 1346 rolled around, people were desperate for food. Then it arrived, an apparent solution. That year, several Italian trading ships docked at the Sicilian port of Messina after traveling along the coast of Africa. On board were sacks of grain that could be sold to starving Europeans. But once merchants began unloading the grain, they noticed something strange. As they opened up the sacks, dead rodents poured out. The merchants realized too late that they had purchased a shipment of rat-infested grain, but by then it was too late. Rats scurried across the docks and into the city. Rats weren't anything new to the people of Sicily. For years, the island had suffered from outbreaks of bubonic plague, which were believed to be carried by rats. Symptoms included painful swellings of the lymph nodes, fever, weakness, and black spots covering the skin. If infected, you likely wouldn't survive more than a week. It would seem that these rats had stowed away on the ships and made the journey to Italy with the grain. Before long, other Italian port cities like Venice, Genoa, and Pisa were overrun with rats. From there, they spread inland, and soon the rest of Europe was doomed. As rats infiltrated homes and businesses, the plague spread rapidly. Doctors did their best to treat the sick, but their remedies only worsened the patient's condition. Treatments included bloodletting, which is the practice of draining some of a patient's blood. In theory, this was supposed to balance the 4 humors or elements of the body, but in reality it just weakened the patient further. They also recommended ointments made from things like unicorn horn shavings and mercury. Yeah, as you can imagine, those didn't work either. There was no escaping the Black Death. It killed people of all social classes. Kings and paupers alike felt its wrath. over the next 5 years, the plague would sweep through Europe 3 times, with each wave becoming more deadly than the last. During the first outbreak, 25% of Parisian noble families died. Even worse, by the third wave, 60% of the population of England was dead. Some places were hit harder than others. For example, the town of EMM in England had a population of 1,200 people. By the time the plague passed through, only 500 remained. Those who did survive the disease were often left with permanent disabilities. Many became deaf or blind, while others had their arms or legs amputated due to gangrene. The Black Death killed so many people that the survivors were often too traumatized to bury them all. Mass graves were dug and covered with lime to keep the smell down, and although the plague eventually subsided, its effects would be felt for years to come. See, after the first wave of the plague struck, the surviving peasants began to demand higher wages. After all, with 30 to 50% of the population gone, their labor was now worth more. But landowners refused to pay more and instead opted to purchase more efficient tools to replace their workers. This set off a chain reaction that led to the eventual collapse of feudalism in Western Europe. Without enough peasants to work the land, feudal lords were forced to pay higher wages to attract laborers. At the same time, the power of the church began to wane as people questioned why God would allow such a terrible tragedy to befall humanity. Humanism began to take root, and people started to look more to the natural world and less to the divine for answers. The Renaissance was born. If that doesn't sound like progress to you, I don't know what does. You might be asking yourself, okay, so how can I avoid getting the plague? Well, good news for you, it's almost impossible. The only proven way to get it is through contact with an infected flea. And since they're kind of hard to come by outside of Asia, Africa, and Southern Europe, you're probably safe. However, there is another deadly disease that kills hundreds of thousands of people every year, and that's cancer. But if you're already freaked out about cancer, did you know that 90% of cancers can be prevented? That's right, you heard me right, 90%. And one of the biggest risk factors for preventable cancers is smoking. So if you still smoke, quit today. And if you don't, congratulations. You're already on the path to great health. Another thing you should do is subscribe if you haven't already. Like this video if you enjoyed it, and maybe leave a comment telling me what you want to see next. Boring History for Sleep is brought to you by all these wonderful patrons. If you want to see your name on the screen and support the channel directly, join the Patreon today. Also, big shout out to my Tier 4 patrons. Thank you so much. And as always, thank you all for watching.